بالعالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد ذي القدر العظيم وعلى آله وأصحابه والتابعين لهم بإحسان وهدى إلى يوم الدين. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, we are going to conclude this blessed month with a further look at some of the key qualities of those seeking the path to Allah Most High. And this is also a good reminder as to how we can strive to be successful as we go past the month of Ramadan. Imam Abdullah bin Alawi al-Haddad would mention an important point, that the concern of the righteous is not merely in actions. It's not merely in doing things. Rather, the concern of the righteous is to have excellence in their actions. And excellence is powerful and transformative. Why is excellence powerful and transformative? Because the nature of actions themselves is that actions express meanings. Actions express meanings. On their own, an action doesn't have much point. Why are you walking? Well, just because I'm walking. Why? I don't know. That walk, firstly, doesn't make sense. Secondly, it's not sustainable, because action without meaning and purpose is not really sustainable. So a lot of times people will say, well, I wasn't able to sustain what I was doing in Ramadan, or there's a period in my life when I was doing all these things and now I can't. And usually it's not for anything other than the loss of purpose and meaning. Why are you doing this? Sometimes we have fleeting motives that spur us on. Someone enters Islam, they have a burst of enthusiasm. Let me find out more. So they do a whole bunch of things. Someone else, they find a group of people that they connect with. So I say, I want to be like them. So you're like rushing forth. But then afterwards, it peters out. Why? Because that wasn't a sustain me. Now you're with them. Because you felt bad that you're different from them, this and that. So you're just drifting. You left your drifting, and because you felt like I'm not as good as dhakir, so I want to be a bit of a dhakir as well. So you're making dhikr and doing all these things. But then you're hanging out. You don't feel so bad that dhakir is more intense than you. Like, he's fine with me. So suddenly things start petering out. So how does one, firstly, sustain actions? Number two, benefit from actions. Number three, attain something through one's actions. And that is the underlying meaning moving the action. Success is conditional on the purpose and intent behind the action. Because that's the reality of actions. Early in the Hikam, in the aphorisms of Ibn Ata'illah, he has a really powerful hikmah, aphorism that states, Al-a'malu suwarun qa'ima. Actions are like propped up, lifeless forms. وَأَرْوَاحُهَا سِرُّ وُجُودِ الْإِخْلَاصِ فِيهَا عفوا وسرها وروح عفوا الأعمال صور قائمة وأرواحها وجود سر الإخلاص فيها. Actions are like propped up, lifeless forms whose life-giving spirit is the subtle reality of sincerity within them. The action is like a propped up dead body. The soul of the action, what gives it life, is sincerity. What is sincerity? Sincerity is the purpose behind which you did it. That you did it for Allah. That you did it for Allah. That's what gives the action life. And all religious works, actions are like propped up, lifeless forms. Your spiritual works are like propped up dead bodies. Your prayer is dead without sincerity. What is sincerity? Sincerity is that your concern is the one worshipped. Sincerity is that your concern is the one worshipped. Your fasting is dead. Although sincerity is easier in fasting than many other things because it's a private action. But your fasting is dead, except to the extent of sincerity within it, the extent that you are seeking Allah within it. Your life is dead. Your life is dead. Most people, the Prophet ﷺ pointed to that in many hadiths, from which Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib said, "An-nasu amwat." Or he said, "Afwan, an-nasu niyam, fa-idha matu intabahu." That people are asleep. They're just going through life asleep. But when they die, do they wake up? When they die, do they wake up? Why? Because most people, most of what they're doing is actions. They keep doing things. What is the meaning behind it? Not much. Why are you praying? I really don't know. Why are you fasting? I really don't know. Why do you go to work? I really don't know. Why are you in college? I really don't know. Why are you volunteering? I really don't know. And that is the key to misery. Right? It's not to have a clear purpose. And one can have fleeting purposes. One can have worldly purposes. But the higher purpose, the meaningful purpose, the purpose that is of consequence in the hereafter, is that you are seeking Allah in what you do. Which is why the hikmah, we're going to look at two aphorisms. One specific to one's actions, and the second broader in one's purpose in life. So the first aphorism that we'll be looking at, Ibn Ata'illah tells us, من علامة النجاح في النهايات الرجوع إلى الله في البدايات. And it is the Hikam, the aphorisms of Ibn Ata'illah, which are really hard to translate because they're so eloquent. But the Arabic is very clear in most of them. Even some of the ones that express high metaphysical meanings, it does so using exceptionally clear language, which is one of the distinguishing qualities of Ibn Ata'illah. That's why many people call him the spokesman of the spiritual path. Right? There's nothing you can object to in what he says. Right? There's nothing unclear. So he says, من علامة النجاح في النهايات, from the signs of success in all endings, الرجوع إلى الله في البدايات, is returning to Allah in all beginnings. From the signs of success in all endings is returning to Allah in all beginnings. And najah, you could translate perhaps as this, from the signs of attainment. Right? Because what we look at, what he's expressing here, from the signs of success in all endings is returning to Allah in all beginnings. What is the alama, a sign, they say, is that which, if found, that which it is a sign of, should be found. Right? So, alama, a sign, right, is that which indicates the presence of something. Now, rigorously speaking, they distinguish between different types of indicators. So, a sign, if found, it means that something is to be found. You see a sign that says Mississauga, it means you probably reached Mississauga, right? Right? So it's a sign, right? And we trust signs. Right? We trust signs.
you turn into Cedar Glen Gate, said, okay, I've almost reached my destination. So that's a sign that if found, that which it points to is found. So what's a sign of najah, of success? That's a sign of success, that success is likely to be found here, is that one is returning to Allah in beginnings. One is returning to Allah in beginnings. What is najah? In the Arabic language, النجح, right? النجح هو بلوغ القصد والمراد فيه, right? نجح, success or attainment, is reaching what is sought. Is reaching what is sought. Okay. So, of attaining, from the signs of attaining what you sought. And what is being sought? What is being sought on the spiritual path? From the signs that you will reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you will attain Allah's closeness, His love, His good pleasure. Right? In all endings. Okay. And why do you say fin nihayat? In all endings? Because every action has an ending. And in reality, what's the ending of each action? The ending of each action is not when it's over in this life. The action, when you do it, it's not over. The nature of actions is that they last in accordance with the intention. So something could look like it's a spiritual work. You prayed, but you only prayed because your best friend's right there. How long does that action last? It's over, at least in its positive consequences. Where something really small could be of tremendous consequence. No one saw it. You came early to the hub and you helped clean up. No one who is considered typically to be of consequence saw it. You weren't emceeing, you weren't doing something big, you weren't giving the lesson, you weren't doing these big things. But that action, what is the worth of it, is not what people see of it, what people think of it, it's not how you felt about it. It is its worth with Allah, which is what was within your heart when you did it. And how you did it, of course. And how you did it. But the how you did it as well is an expression of why you did it. Because sometimes we can delude ourselves in our intentions. Right? So I'm praying for Allah, but then you move on and say, I'm going to show her how to pray properly. Right? So the reason, how you did it was actually affected your intention. The outward excellence is meant to be an expression of the inward excellence. Because the two are supposed to come together. Because if you're truly trying to have an excellent, you're trying to be truly sincere, then one of the signs of sincerity is to try to do it with outward excellence. If you're trying to do it seeking the pleasure of Allah, it will just follow that you do it in the manner pleasing to Allah. That you do it in accordance with the divine command, based on knowledge. In accordance with the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, as he commanded us to follow the sunnah in form and spirit. Right? So, returning to Allah, so the endings, because each action, its ending is with Allah. وَأَنَّ إِلَى رَبِّكَ الْمُنْتَهَى. And truly to your Lord is all ending. Every action lasts potentially till eternity. Okay? So many verses and hadiths. For example, the recitation of Quran. يُقَالُ لِصَاحِبِ الْقُرْآنِ اقْرَأْ وَارْقَى. It will be said to the person of Quran, recite and rise. فَإِنَّ مَنْزِلَتَكَ عِنْدَ آخِرِ آيَةٍ تَقْرَأ. Right? For your standing will be in accordance with the last verse that you recited. that you'll be rewarded for all that you did. Right? So the action, you recited, it's over. No, it's not over. That is what's real. Right? In reality, it is the good of the actions that is real. The tangible is not real. You can't take it with you into the grave, except insofar as the good that was sought or done through it. That's why from the signs of success in all endings, in the endings of every action, is returning to Allah. Right? Sorry, I put a terrible typo, sorry. Returning to Allah. Sorry. I could blame the new operating system, but more honesty would be just to blame the operator. Is returning to Allah in all beginnings. Right? That when you begin, you return to Allah. Right? What does it mean to return to Allah in all beginnings? It means, firstly, to return with one's intention. Right? That don't just jump into actions, right? But to formulate, have a clear intent behind the action of seeking Allah. That's one part of returning to Allah. Right? The second aspect of returning to Allah is to return to Allah by performing the action in accordance with what is pleasing to Allah, in accordance with the command of Allah. And what's pleasing to Allah is that which is in accordance with the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? That's part of returning to Allah with, in the way that is pleasing to Him. Okay? So you pause before you act, and you make an intention for Allah. That I'm doing this for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How am I doing it for Allah? So you formulate, you define your purpose behind the action. Why am I volunteering at the Mississauga Food Bank? Oh, Umar told me to go. Miskeen, that's terrible. You wasted your time. Because Umar told you to go. If you dug down, you might find a good intention hidden somewhere. But there, what's a sign that this will be successful? Actually, even practically, what if Umar moves on to doing something else? He becomes director of the Muslim Welfare Center. So he's no longer telling you to go to the Muslim food bank, to the Mississauga Food Bank. Will you stop going? Or you get bored of him telling you. Right? That's where, before you begin something, you formulate your intention behind it. Whether it's in one's acts of worship, in the service that one does, in one's work. What's the sign that you're successful at work? Spiritually successful at work, is that you return to Allah at the beginning of the work. So you formulate an intention. But before you can formulate the intention, there's a precursor, which is, you ask yourself the question, is this or can this be pleasing to Allah? And there's degrees of questions. The least question you can ask is this acceptable to Allah? Is this pleasing to Allah? Is this beloved to Allah? Is this the best of what Allah would seek from me? So that's a beginning question. Right? A beginning question is this pleasing to Allah? Is this beloved to Allah? Is this acceptable? There's levels of questions. Acceptance, pleasure, belovedness. Right? You sometimes, someone doesn't find, well, should I get up for tahajjud? And you're like exhausted. You're like, you know the beloved answer, but you say, okay, what's acceptable? Well, make sure I get up for fajr. Okay. Okay. So, you ask that question. You formulate an intention. I'm doing this for Allah. How am I doing this for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And it's important, part of being serious in returning to Allah is to formulate clear intentions in all that one does. Right? And the intention is one and it's multiple. It's one, is that there's only one intended, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in everything that one does. But one has multiple intentions which are the ways that you will seek the pleasure of Allah through what you do. On Eid day, why do you visit family? In our family, all of us visit my sister. Why? She makes really good food. No. Because I'll get to see, I'm kind of scared because I have relatives I'm in trouble with. So I get to be held in court on a happy day. So on a happy day, you get forgiven. Right? Hopefully. Right? You can go for all kinds of ulterior motives. Zubayr says, because, well, Zubaydah will be there too. Or whatever. But that's where, and a lot of times when people go through things like this, they find a real emptiness in their heart. It's a real phenomenon that a lot of people, especially thoughtful people, very often, as people are celebrating, they feel kind of sorrowful. Why? Because they're wondering, what's the point? Because they've missed the point. Because the point isn't these things, it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So part of formulating the intention is to think, how will I seek the pleasure of Allah in this? How will I seek the pleasure of Allah? By visiting relatives during Eid. How do you seek the pleasure of Allah? By visiting relatives during Eid. Or friends or whoever. How? Yeah, but the intent, I'm doing it for Allah, but how are you doing it for Allah? This is where the multiple intentions come. Yeah, the first thing, renewing bonds of kinship, right? To maintain family ties. But even before that, the first thing is to obey the command of Allah. Okay? And the command of Allah, there's some things that He's made obligatory. There's other things that He's made recommended. And maintaining family ties, what is it? It's a duty, right? An obligation. You don't have to do it in this particular way, but if you intend that this is to fulfill my obligation of maintaining family ties, this is part of fulfilling that obligation. What else would you intend? Maintaining family ties. Obeying the command of Allah. Fulfilling family ties. What else? To spread joy. Which is beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The best of faith is bringing happiness to another's heart. But you do it for the sake of Allah. You don't just do it for a purely mundane reason. That this is pleasing to Allah. And then you will have a greater urge because you have a higher purpose in wanting to please others. Otherwise, if you ask yourself, left to yourself, does it really make sense to make others happy? Because after a while you feel like, why do I have to make others happy? Why doesn't anyone make me happy? But that's not what it's about. And that's, they say, one of the things that service is a test of. That generally, one of the reasons service, khidmah of others requires sincerity is that it's a thankless thing. People generally won't thank you. But of course they'll pick on your mistake. They'll pick on your mistake, but they won't thank you. Okay? So, to bring happiness to another's heart. What else? With respect to Eid, specifically for example, there's other intentions. That to rejoice for the sake of Allah. To rejoice for the sake of Allah. Rejoice in what? To rejoice in the great blessing of the month of a month of devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a great, who facilitated it? Try in December, try to spend a month fasting and praying 20 rak'ahs on your own. Will most of us be able to do that? No. And it's permitted. You can pray 20 rak'ahs whenever you want. But would most of us be able to do that? No. It's a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He facilitated for us. Right? So, to be grateful for the blessing, and this is an expression of gratitude. Okay? To partake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's blessings, which are a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One thing that helps in multiple intentions is knowledge. Because these are all things which I mentioned, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned, that these are هذه أيام أكل وشرب وتكبير لله تعالى. These are days of eating and drinking and magnifying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and of gratitude for His blessings, and all these different. So one formulates the intentions, and one thinks of other things to reconnect with people I was disconnected with. So for example, you're going to visit your sister, but you know you and your sister were friends with this person. You heard that she's also moved to Milton, where your sister is. So you call your sister and say, you know what? Why don't we invite so and so? Because you know they've just come back to the GTA, and that way you help reconnect with old relationships. You think of what that does is it makes it clear how you're going to try to seek the pleasure of Allah. You say, well, we have a lot of elderly family members, so let me intend to serve the elderly, right? And you think about other meanings, right? And what does that do? One, it brings meaning to the action. It makes it clear how you'll be pleasing to Allah. So then it'll change the actions themselves. You won't just show up. Most of the time, most people just show up on Eid days. Have to go here, have to go there. Right? And it becomes a bit of a burden. Some families, you know, if they have what my dad calls a successful visit, which is when you visit someone, they're not home. Right? And my dad's still, now he doesn't, he's an older statesman now, so he doesn't, people are expected to go to him. But, before, we used to go visit people, even when you could call them, so don't call them in advance. Because you put a post-it note, the Rabbanis came to visit. And they put the time. And my dad would be really happy, a successful visit. Right? But in all of these, that, the believer, should detail out. Part of returning to Allah is, how am I seeking Allah? What is my path to Allah in this action? My work. A lot of people are miserable with their work. It's a burden. How will I seek Allah through my work? Think of all the ways. Upholding good character, gratitude. Upholding good character, being of assistance to others. Through the work to be of service, actual or potential, to humanity. I once told someone about this making intentions. They say, well, I work at my parents' clothing store. And they sell clothing that's Islamically questionable. Now, knowledge is mercy. Because he was sort of like a tightly knit family, and he had no choice, basically. They said, we don't care if you go to college, you better take over the family business. So he was fighting with his parents, etc. What's the ruling of selling clothing that is not modest, Islamically? So what's the ruling of selling miniskirts, for example? Or selling, let's say, short men's shorts. Thankfully, they're not in fashion, but let's say they come back in fashion. Really short men's shorts. What's the ruling of selling that? What's the ruling of selling miniskirts and short shorts? It's completely permissible. And there's difference of opinion about it, but certainly in the Hanafi school it's completely permissible, because the principle is, and I have a Shafi'i scholar standing at the back who's looking like, what's up with these Hanafis? but in the Hanafi school, the basic principle is that everything that has a permissible usage, a permissible primary usage, not some far-fetched use, is permissible to sell. Everything that has a permissible primary usage. Someone could wear those short shorts as alternatives to underwear. Possible. Someone could wear them in the intimacy of their bedroom with their spouse. Unlikely, but possible. Someone could decide they want to wear that under their jilbab. Permissible. As long as they remain covered, permissible. So anything that has a of course, there's values that when you have a choice, so you're starting your own company. So you say, mini skirts and men's shorts incorporated. We'd say, Brother Sabir, have some sabr, do something better. Right? So when you have a choice, right? But that's part of why, part of returning to Allah is to returning to the guidance of Allah. And especially for those who are religious, sometimes we imagine things to be much more difficult than they are. You have to take over your family business. It's like, that's kind of expected. So before you say it has to be haram, find out, is it haram? Right? And when you have a choice, there's dislikedness in selling things that have commonly impermissible usages. Because something that is haram, you can't sell. You can't sell cigarettes, because they're haram, or makruh tahriman, whatever. Right? Say, well, someone could use it to scare the flies in their backyard. Does anyone use cigarettes to scare their flies in the backyard? Is it a primary usage? No. Could you say, well, I'm buying a Spanish guitar to kill cockroaches because I'm scared of cockroaches, big flat surface. Say, well, just buy a flat tray. We'll do the same thing. A primary use, not a far-fetched use. Right? Someone said, I'm buying drugs to fertilize my plants. There's much cheaper fertilizer. That's far-fetched, but a primary use. So part of returning to Allah is returning to the knowledge of Allah's guidance. Because in this case, for example, instead of getting into fight with your parents, if you return, part of returning to Allah is to return to the limits of Allah. And there is leeway in it. And there's a consideration of serving one's parents. Also, returning to Allah is to returning to not just to knowledge, but also religious guidance and counsel. That how do you deal with it? How do you deal if you have to work at your parents' company? Another example, sorry, fiqh is tempting. Let's say, real life case. Someone sent a question that my father has a shoe company. He has a shoe store. And some of the dress shoes have pigskin lining. What's the ruling of wearing pigskin? Okay, let me ask it too. What's the ruling of using pigskin? What is it? It's haram, it's not permissible. What's the ruling of wearing a shoe that has pigskin lining? And I'm not making this up. This is a legal conclusion that I was coming to, but on sensitive matters, one should always consult. So I sought fatwa on this from 3 major specialist centers for fatwa in different Muslim countries, specialized in Hanafi fiqh, just to confirm. And I'd consulted a number of my teachers. One of them got fed up with me. Said, "You've asked me like 5 questions on this kind of stuff." I said, "Sayyidi, but I'm not asking for personal interest. It's a real question." And that's something one should always do. Should always ask until people tell you to stop asking, kind of thing, right? So, well, you know it now. Just the ruling of, there's a difference, right? And that's part of the mercy of our deen, right? There's a difference between wearing a pigskin shoe and wearing a shoe of some other leather whose inner lining is pigskin. The first is haram, according to the vast majority of Islamic scholarship. Wearing something from pigskin is impermissible. Wearing something from some other leather that has lining from pigskin is makruh, is disliked. So what does that mean? Means you're going shoe shopping, avoid that. And be cautious about it. Learn how to tell pigskin and you leave it. Okay? And that's part of returning to Allah in beginnings, that you know how to do things in a manner that's pleasing to Allah. Right? Not just what's obligatory and haram, but also what is recommended and disliked. So pigskin lining is disliked. So you learn how you can avoid that when you're buying your shoes. But the balance of our deen is because real life situations sometimes give you difficult choices. The only job you can get, let's say, is at a shoe shop. What's the ruling of selling those kinds of shoes? Part of returning to Allah is to know what's the command of Allah. But don't just assume that it has to be haram. Find out reliably. And sometimes there's a distinction. So selling shoes that have pigskin lining, like using them, is makruh. But when there's particular circumstances, it may not be makruh in that situation. For example, it's your father's shoe shop and your father is now 67 and he needs your help. He's slowing down. And then what do? But you take religious counsel, part of returning to Allah, that how do I do this with excellence? So what do? Say, well, I'll get involved. I'll excel in the work because I'm not doing something haram. I'm not selling haram things. There's karaha, dislikedness in some of these things, but my intention is to bring happiness to my parents' heart, to help sustain the family business, to be able to secure a future, like financial well-being for my own children. You make many good intentions in it, and your intention in pursuing that is what? That I want to take gradual I want to take, effective, deliberate, gradual if necessary, steps to transition towards things that are not questionable. And that's why consulting is powerful. So instead of fighting with your father, you say, no, you should accept it. Strive to excel in that work for the sake of Allah. Make the intention that you're going to transition from those things that are disliked in your sales, which they're not haram. There's dislikedness towards that which is unquestionably permissible. Okay? And you'll win over your father with excellence. You won't fight him with it. Right? So that's why part of returning to Allah in actions, right? There's a certain sense of, is this the thing to do? There's the intention. There's how you do it, in terms of the limits, but also at the level of excellence. And that's why sometimes, the question should not just be, and very often people just ask, is it permissible for me to do this? And that's fine. That's a level of acceptability. But one should also be at a level of concern or ask, what should I do? What is better for me to do? Or this appears to be what you want to do. How do I do this with excellence? Right? And that helps one make much better choices. And alhamdulillah, the brother started, and he convinced his father that, look, an untapped market is, and he used the angle of vegans, like vegetarians and vegans and others. Of course it failed, but they transitioned much of their line to what? To vegetarian friendly shoes. Because it was a long shot. I said, what? How? So I couldn't figure out how to convince him not to carry just pigskin. But they decided to target a niche market, and sometimes a niche market is better than, like instead of just having just a very general offering, he targeted a particular niche, and they got all kinds of different synthetic, I don't know what they got. I was just advising on the religious part. He said it worked, right? And that's part of it, because when the concern is there to seek the pleasure of Allah, try to do it in a manner that's pleasing to Allah, that's full of benefit. And his father was pleased with him, and he exercised complete caution. He avoided all leather, because he actually had waswasa too. He had misgivings, so he wanted to avoid all leather if he could. So I tried to convince him, no, just learn how to identify the leather. So this is returning to Allah in beginnings. Right? To ask oneself, what are the sunnahs related to this? And one should ask that about everything. Because sometimes we jump to actions. They read hadiths on the virtues of giving adhan. So they start giving adhan, and they've been giving it for years at the masjid. How long does it take to learn the sunnahs of the adhan? There's not that many sunnahs of the adhan. Right? One of the basic sunnahs is pronounce it properly, please. Right? Right? There's Al-As'adi, who was a mufti of Mecca, as Hanafi, from the 10th, 11th century. He mentions that there's this ignorant Indian who goes around the market saying, and they put it in broken letters, but actually it pronounces La ilaha illallah, but Muhammadun Rasulullah, but it was written La ilaha illallah. Because that's how they say La ilaha illallah, but I guess he was saying it very slowly. Right? But he was probably an elderly man. He was pronouncing it so slowly that it was considered mispronunciation. So the muftis, they're not there to give advice. They're just to give a ruling. So he said, Yumna, thumma yusjar, thumma yutrad min al-Madina, wa yakunu dhalika min imatat al-adha an al-tariq. He said, he's told to desist. Then he is warned. Then he is removed from the city, and that will be from removing harm from people's way. Because he's mispronouncing this, so it's considered as if you're corrupting the shahada. So just learn how to do it properly. Right? The adhan. Learn how to do things according to sunnahs. There's numerous sunnahs related to work, for example. So learn that. Anything that you do, learn what are the sunnahs related to this. You want to travel, just pause, say, okay, how do I seek the pleasure of Allah in this? What are the limits related to this? Like how will, what will I have to do? How will I pray? How will I make wudu? Right? What are other considerations? What is guidance related to this? So you learn that. That's from returning to Allah in beginnings. What are the sunnahs? And there's numerous sunnahs related to travel. Imam Nawawi in his Majmu'ah, when he talks about the rulings of travel, he mentions there's 70-something sunnahs related to travel. And they're actually, just learning them is inspiring, because you're inspired. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful that a lot of them have to do, and they don't apply to us because we don't have an animal, but that when you're traveling, you take care. وَأَنْ يُرَاعِي مَصْلَحَةَ الْحَيَوَانِ. Right? To take care, and ri'ayah is to carefully guard. Right? And what's maslahah? Not just the haqq. The maslahah is the best interest of the animal. To carefully guard the best interest of the animal with respect to how long you travel and how much you put on the animal and when you rest and what you feed it and what you give it to drink and how much food and drink you give it. Okay? And then he brings the hadiths about it, etc. So you learn that returning to Allah also increases you. You know, that how do I do this in a manner pleasing? That increases you in yaqeen, right, about the truth and beauty and excellence of that guidance. But it spurs you on, right? Because it's not just enough to put a stamp for Allah, and that's I return to Allah in the beginning. No, whether in worship or in work or in relations or in life, the returning to Allah has all these aspects, right? To make multiple intentions, to look at what are the various sunnahs regarding this. And part of that practically is as the various occasions come up in life, one should always, especially if one's a student of knowledge, serious about knowledge, is always make it a point to review what is the religious guidance, particularly what are the sunnahs and adab relating to this. So marriage season is coming. What do I do? Which weddings do I attend? Well, firstly, one should make, part of returning to Allah is you make your criteria the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What weddings am I going to attend? Very simple. Those that I'm permitted to attend. Simple. It's not a very difficult question. I'm a servant of Allah. So you find out. But what is it? Sometimes there's some things that are clear. Some random guy called Sabir invited you to his wedding. You don't know who he is. He doesn't know who you are. Seems to be rather questionable in what's going to happen, so you might give it a miss. But there's others that are more sensitive. So what do? You seek counsel about those things. But then before you go, there's the first wedding of wedding season. When does wedding season begin? We should be well into it, but I've successfully avoided, alhamdulillah, managed to avoid most weddings. Only been to like 8 or 9 in 7 years that I've been back in Toronto. And 3 of them have been immediate family. 2 brother-in-laws, 2 have been very close friends. I don't know why I showed up at the other 2. Actually, the other 2 I conducted, that's why. One rightfully, and the other by mistake. That's the story of my 7. The 7 that I remember. There's 2 others, I have no clue what happened there. So, before you show up, when does wedding season start? Some begin, but when? Spring. Some place is wedding season the whole year, but spring, early summer, wedding season starts. But you're attending your first wedding of the season. What should you do? Always go back just quickly. How long does it take to review what are the sunnahs of attending a wedding? That's part of returning to Allah. It's not only say, I'm attending this wedding for the sake of Allah. That's better than attending completely heedlessly. But you find out, can I, and actually it's a major question, right? Can I attend this wedding? Right? And sometimes we do have to vote with our people. People complain, there's all this fitna at weddings. Be very clear. If it's not correct, or find out. The ones that are sensitive, find out. Sometimes you know, there's a theory of marriage ceremony degeneration. They start relatively halal, they start becoming makruh and haram. So before the slippery slope, you can leave. Show up early, help out, help set things up, greet everyone, serve the first round of tea, be nice to everyone, crack a few jokes with the bride or the groom, whoever you know, although they're likely not there yet. That's the only hitch in the whole plan. But honestly, the bride and groom won't notice you. They have enough on their mind, and there's enough chaos as it is. You just apologize after. Sorry, I didn't get to greet you, mashallah. May Allah bless your marriage, right? Just send them an email. Even that night, say, sorry, I wasn't able to catch you there. I had to leave. And that's it. But you review these sunnahs. So what do you say to the bride or groom? Right? There's sunnahs related to that. Right? Certain adab, etc. So that way, this is from returning to Allah. And that's a sign of success. That's a sign of success. You do that, you try to act with excellence, you are successful. Even if things don't work out as you expected. You're hoping that Uncle Jamil would be there. He wasn't. But you succeeded because you sought Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through it. Right? And this idea of returning to Allah in beginnings, one of the hadith that strongly emphasizes this and affirms its consequence is the hadith famous as Hadith ibn Abbas. Although there's many hadiths that are Hadith ibn Abbas. Right? But very often they'll use this term, the hadith of so and so, because in a particular chapter, that is the central hadith. So for example, when it comes to the description of wudu, they'll say Hadith Uthman. The Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, one of the most comprehensive descriptions of the prophetic wudu is the hadith of Sayyidina Uthman. About ghusl, very famous is the hadith of Sayyidah Maymuna. So they say hadith Sayyidah Maymuna. Even though Sayyidah Maymuna related many hadiths, this is not the only hadith, but usually it's referring to her hadith regarding this subject. So just be careful. Right? So Ibn Abbas, for example, they talk about, are there multiple earths? Actually, are there multiple Adams? There's a controversial hadith known as Hadith Ibn Abbas about there being many Adams. And many of the hadith scholars said this is weak, others said it's strong. It's very controversial. And then, of course, second point was, what does it mean? Allahu A'lam. But the hadith of Ibn Abbas, meaning regarding this, also known as Wasiyat Ibn Abbas, because the Prophet ﷺ's counsel to Ibn Abbas is the hadith, Ihfazillah yahfazk. Be mindful of Allah, and Allah will be mindful of you. Or literally, take care of Allah, Allah will take care of you. Ihfazillah tajidhu tujahak. Remain mindful of Allah, and you'll find Him before you. So this is one of the central principles. What does it mean to be mindful of Allah? It's what Ibn Ata'illah referred to as returning to Allah in beginnings. Is this acceptable to Allah? Do it for Allah. Make multiple intentions. Make sure that you're doing it in accordance with knowledge and the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ regarding it. Right? And then in doing it, rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala therein. Right? Rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala therein. Which is why the three essential qualities inwardly, right? Because there's before you begin, and then once you begin. Right? Before you begin, you ask those questions, those considerations that we talked about. Right? Ask yourself, is this acceptable, pleasing, or beloved to Allah? Do it for Allah. Make multiple intentions. How you will seek the pleasure of Allah? Through that action. Learn the limits related to that action and the sunnah so you can do it with excellence. That's before the action. But then returning to Allah, as you begin to act, there's three essential qualities, which are الاعتماد على الله والتفويض والتوكل. Right? Reliance upon Allah, consigning the matter upon Allah, consigning the matter to Allah and trusting in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself. You do it. What is the difference between reliance and trust? I'timad is what are you depending upon? What are you depending upon? So you go there, you're taking the means, but you're asking Allah for assistance. You're seeing that your success is only by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So you took the means. You try to find out, is the wedding okay, whatever, and then so you say, okay, I'll show up early, I'll help, this and that, but you're relying on Allah that, oh Allah, facilitate this for me, oh Allah, make it easy for me. Right? That's relying on Allah. You consign the matter to Allah, meaning that you're not worried about the outcomes. Right? You try to act taking into account the outcomes, but you're not worried about the results, because you don't know. You could go, and part of consigning matters to Allah is sometimes we complicate things. We don't know how we'll decide, what we'll do. And part of being a servant of Allah is very simple. I'll do what's pleasing to Allah. I'll do my best to do what's pleasing to Allah, what's acceptable to Allah. Like we had, when Habib Ali al-Jifri came to Toronto, we had the dinner with him, and he asked a very shocking question. Because most of it, like it was a meeting / dinner, so most of the people were there were like either sheikh types or students of knowledge or community leaders, activists. So he asked this question: if you're invited by a gay Muslim group to give a talk at their center, would you go? And a bunch of people looked at me. I said, like, why are you asking me? Right? He said, why? What would you do? I said, I have a simple answer, but I'll mention it after. We should begin with your right. So he's easy going, so he began with my right. My answer was simple. I said there's 3 people I would consult before making a decision. Matters of social judgment, I have a mentor, Ustad Nazim Baksh, I ask, because he understands the community, etc. He's a person of good judgment. And I have a good friend, Shaykh Zahir. Matters that require religious judgment, I'll consult with him. I trust his opinion. He's got, although I give him a hard time, but I'll consult with him. And if it needs to be escalated, there's some people I'll ask. So then the discussion veered from there. So someone asked one of the mashayikh, he said, I'd go, but I'd go without my jubba and imama. But it wasn't about the gay Muslim association, it was about another thing. He said, I'd go there, but without my jubba and imama, because that has its sanctity. And so then they asked Habib Ali, what would he do? He said, well, when it comes to the imama, where my imama can go, I can go. Where my imama can't go, I can't go. Right? And that was so that's my criteria. So if I'm going, my imama is going. But if my imama can't go, I can't go either. Right? And that was beautiful. Right? But sometimes you have to know who you are. Right? And that's part of consigning the matter to Allah. You're a servant of Allah. All you have to do is to respond right. So you try to find out, etc., but turns out that they're openly serving alcohol at your cousin's wedding. Openly. Not just some people in a corner or whatever, but it's openly. And all kinds of things are happening. What do I do now? Consigning matters to Allah is one of the easiest ways of deciding. Just ask yourself one question. What will be pleasing to Allah? Will it be pleasing for Allah for you to remain? The answer is no. Leave. That's it. Then you ask yourself a second question. How would that action be pleasing to Allah? That's part of this idea of returning to Allah. So maybe you leave, but maybe just before leaving, at least greet the various people. You don't have to declare, I am leaving. Right? But you go, you see it's crazy. So you go, greet the host. Assalamu alaikum, congratulations on your daughter's wedding. May Allah bless the marriage, etc. You go greet a few people, etc., and you drift. You don't have to, and if you don't think they're going to listen, you don't have to say anything. If you think they'll listen, then that's different. So that's consigning the matter to Allah. That you leave outcomes in the hands of Allah. You're just worried about right response. And trusting in Allah. Trusting in Allah that if you're committed to do the right thing, the right results will come. That Allah takes care of those who are committed to right choice. Because success is not measured by the merely outward. Success is measured by this returning to Allah. And that's why it's a really powerful aphorism, that from the signs of success in all endings is returning to Allah in all beginnings. Why did you stay at the wedding? There's some things that you don't like the way they're set up. But you ask yourself, or you consulted, you asked that if a wedding is this way, can one remain if it's one's own sister? It's okay. As long as this and that's not happening, you could remain. So it's okay. So that's returning to Allah. And if you always commit to doing this, then every ending will be a successful ending, regardless of how its outward appearances are. And we'll close with the next aphorism, which we won't expand on, but it relates directly to this. And the Arabic is so beautiful, right? In such a succinct way, he expresses such an expansive meaning. He says, "Man ashraqat bidayatuhu, ashraqat nihayatuhu." Whoever's beginning is illumined, their end is illumined. Okay? So what's the relationship between this and the previous hikmah? The other hikmah has to do with specific actions, in the beginnings of specific actions. Whoever's beginning is illumined, this refers to one's path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the way one directs oneself. If you directed yourself in the beginning of your affairs, right, in an illumined way. What's an illumined way? That it was for Allah. It was clearly, the purpose was clear, that it was for Allah. That's what you were seeking. And not for ulterior motives. And if that remains through their pursuit, then the end is a guarantee. The end is a guarantee that ashraqat nihayatuhu, the ending is illumined. But one has to be careful about that. The care about that is illustrated by one of the great Imams of the spiritual path, Abu al-Hasan al-Shadhili. He mentions that كنت أنا وصاحب لي نعبد الله في مغارة ونقول في هذا الشهر يفتح الله علينا أو في هذا الشهر يفتح علينا في هذه الجمعة يفتح الله علينا. Said, I and a companion of mine had devoted ourselves to worshipping Allah in a cave. They'd gone into a retreat, temporary. I mean, he was a great scholar and a teacher, etc. But decided to take some time out to engage in some devotion to strengthen their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But they would discuss with each other, say, inshallah, we'll have our spiritual opening this month. Or this Friday we'll have a great spiritual opening. And they'd always, this would be their, so why were they worshipping? For spiritual openings, right? فوقف على باب المغارة رجل عليه سمات الخير فقال السلام عليكم فرددنا عليه السلام وقلنا له كيف أنت فنهض علينا وقال كيف يكون حال من يقول في هذا الشهر يفتح الله في هذه الجمعة يفتح الله لا فتح ولا فلاح هل عبدنا الله كما أمرنا ثم غاب. So, and while they were in this, a man came and stood at the entrance of their cave, and he had the signs of righteousness and good. So he said, Assalamu alaikum. So, and we responded to the salam. Abu al-Hasan al-Shadhili and his friend. And they said to this righteous man, how are you? So he came to us suddenly and he said, how would the state be of someone who says, in this month we'll have an opening and this Friday we'll have an opening? He said, why are you asking about my state? What about your state? He said, could we not just worship Allah? He said, there will be no opening and no success. La fatha wa la falah. There will be no opening and no success. Could we not just worship Allah for Allah as He commanded? And then he left. So he said, so then we understood where we had slipped. Where we had slipped. Their motive was good. Let's go and worship Allah in the cave. It was the idea, moving it was for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But for it to be illumined, it has to be done in a way that is pleasing to Allah. For it to be for Allah, you have to be clear, how will it be for Allah? Right? And that for Allah is not just, what do I get out of it? But that is genuinely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is, man ashraqat bidayatuhu. So whoever's beginning is luminous. It is for Allah, seeking Allah Himself in a way that is beloved to Allah. Right? With the excellence of the Sunnah manifest therein. And this is a promise mentioned in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Ankabut, which is the 29th surah, verse 69, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَمَعَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. And those who strive in us, we shall surely guide to the paths to us. And Allah is indeed with those of excellence. What does it mean? And the expression in Arabic is very interesting. وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا. It could have easily said, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا مِنْ أَجْلِنَا, for us, or لَنَا. Why does it say وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا? Right? There's many explanations. One of the briefest but most powerful, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا, it conveys three meanings, which is لَنَا وَبِنَا وَمَعَنَا. Right? The striving in us is that they strive for our sake. They strive for our sake. By us. Right? They strive for Allah, seeking Him, by Allah, reliant upon Him, and ma'ana, with Allah, conscious of Him throughout that striving. Right? And that's the striving that is beloved to Allah, that is for Allah. Right? So it's seeking Allah's pleasure in a way that will be pleasing to Him. By Allah, reliant upon Allah, not by your spiritual muscle and smart and ability, but with the realization that there's no ability nor power except through Allah. So you strive, but dependent upon Allah. Okay? With Allah, and you infuse that action with remembrance. You go up at the wedding, how is that wedding part of seeking Allah? Part of it is, what is your state in that endeavor? That you're with Allah, you strive to remain conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala therein. Your work, how can your work be part of your striving in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, quote unquote, that you do it for Allah with clarity and consciousness. By Allah, reliant upon Him, thereby, and with Allah, in consciousness of Allah. Right? And that is success, which is why Allah, what's the consequence of it? وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَمَعَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. And indeed, Allah truly is with those of excellence. What is excellence? Excellence is this kind of striving. So, but jahadu, they strived. And jihad is istifraghu taqa, is to give one's utmost in attainment. But that giving the utmost, that's the adab of being a servant of Allah. But it's not your striving that will get you there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ, we shall guide. We shall guide. Right? And that's the realization of you're doing it for Allah, by Allah, with complete sense that the giver is Allah. It's not you who will attain, but it's Allah who will grant. Right? You don't go and stand at the door and say, here I am, open the door. Right? No. Right? You stand as a beggar stands. Right? As a beggar stands. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He grant us that seeking, that make our beginnings on the path of seeking Allah in everything in life, in our devotion, in our spiritual concern, in our work, in our studies, in our seeking knowledge, in our social dealings, in our relationships, in our family, in our relaxing, that He make it all from our turning to Allah, and that the realities of من علامة النجح في النهايات الرجوع إلى الله في البدايات be manifest for us. That from the sign of success in all endings is returning to Allah in all beginnings. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of those who return to Him in all these ways, seeking Him, reliant upon Him, with consciousness of Him, striving to uphold the sunnah of the one who was described sallallahu alayhi wasallam by his own wife Sayyidah Aisha. كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يذكر الله على كل أحيانه. The Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم would be in remembrance of Allah in all his states. That is the state. Whatever he was engaged in, right? Because no one had as wide nor as deep engagement as the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم in matters spiritual, in matters worldly, in matters social, with his own family. Sayyidah Aisha asked, how was the Prophet ﷺ when he came home after a day of tending to people's needs? She said he was a man. And Sayyidah Aisha had a very strong personality. That he was a man. And she was saying, okay, you're wondering about the Prophet, look at yourself. Be a man. But what does being a man entail? Not what you imagine. Right? He says, كان رجلا. Says, how? Because he says, كان في حاجة أهله. He was in the fulfillment of the needs of his family. Right? He would help them with their household duties. He would assist them in their needs. Right? If they wanted something, to say, I came back after all these things, go ask. He would be in their assistance. Okay? But that too, that's part of his striving for Allah. Right? But then she said, فَإِذَا حَانَتِ الصَّلَاةِ فَكَانَ لَا يَعْرِفُنَا وَلَا نَعْرِفُهُ. But if time came to pray, he wouldn't know us and we wouldn't know him. Because every moment has a right response to Allah. When one is with family, one should be with family. Right? And that part of returning to Allah in everything is to give everything, is to give Allah His full in everything. So if you work with excellence and give it its due for Allah. When you're with family, give that its excellence for Allah. One of the ways that people fail to have excellence is that they just mix everything all up. And they don't give anything its due as a result. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of those who are embodied with excellence, who imbue excellence, and who turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with excellence. Before we close, any questions? Go ahead.
So would you say that this is the pre-plan to endeavors and also the mechanism that we use to review our actions?
Yeah, so there's before one decides what to do, right, one has to pre-plan, one has to think, is this what I should be doing? Right? So one has to ask oneself, should I do that? And the Prophet ﷺ had deliberate action. Sayyidah Aisha said, كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا عمل عملا أثبته. If the Messenger of Allah صلى الله عليه وسلم did something, he would make it a firm practice. He didn't just do any old thing. Right? Why? Because it's probably that this and this specifically was what is pleasing to Allah. And some things are general, right? Some things are ongoing practice. Some things are circumstantial, right? But particularly the things that are ongoing, that this is the right thing to do. So it requires a plan, yeah. And anyone who's successful in worldly matters has a plan. But if you want to be successful in one's journey to Allah, one needs to have a plan. But they say there's two types of planning. There's a praiseworthy planning and a blameworthy planning. The praiseworthy planning is to ask oneself what will be pleasing to Allah and how can I take the means of pursuing that, which is that which is likely to be pleasing to Allah. Right? That is praiseworthy planning. Blameworthy planning, which is called tadbir, is the idea of self-direction, that I'm in control of my life. I'm the captain of my ship and the master of my fate. No, you're deluded. Right? Even in worldly terms, someone who thinks like that will make poor decisions. Because people say, this is what I have to do. And they get rigid in their thinking. And they may be, someone starts with one thing, but they end up finding something else is a better thing to do. Even in worldly terms. Like how did post-it notes come? They're trying to make a certain type of glue, but they found that, this adhesive actually is very good to keep papers. You stick papers and remove them. and it doesn't lose its adhesiveness, right? So that it needs that flexibility. But we have that spiritual flexibility, which is what? That we realize that results are not in our hands. The blameworthy planning is when you try to control results in yourself or in others. And that's tadbir. And they say at-tadbiru tadmir. Right? That this sense of self-direction is destruction. I have to do this. It might not be what you have to do. It may not be pleasing to Allah. It may affect you, the way you do it. Your consideration of it, that just brings ugliness in one's own life. It may not be the right thing to do. And also the results, you cannot control them anyways. Okay? You could have tried your utmost, and actually so many studies of companies, for example. Sometimes you wonder, why did a particular company fail or not? Sometimes it's almost random, right? Almost some very difficult to unpredictable variables, right? Things that are beyond anyone's control. Right? Someone decided to start an umbrella company, and a few things happen, and there's huge demand for umbrellas. All the other umbrella companies had just gone bankrupt, and they became very successful. Or something happens, you start an umbrella company, that whole dry season, no one bought your umbrellas, you went bankrupt. The umbrellas weren't any worse, your plan wasn't any worse, there's circumstances beyond your control. Which is why the planning that is blameworthy is to worry about results. And which is actually foolishness. Right? That, I wonder if I'll succeed in the exam. Well, your wondering won't change that. You worry about taking the right means towards the right end, which is the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The results, of course you act trying to consider what will be likely to bring right results that will be pleasing to Allah. But you know you don't control those results. That's where reliance upon Allah is actually empowering. Reliance. Ista'in billah wa la ta'jaz. If this is the right thing to do, be avid for it, rely upon Allah, don't deem yourself incapable. Because part of the strength that reliance upon Allah gives you is that you're not pursuing that by your strength, that I've failed many times before. No, but seek it by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. And whoever places their trust in Allah, He is their sufficiency. And that's what we should leave the month of Ramadan with. That if we reflect, that, okay, what am I supposed to be doing post-Ramadan? You consider. Don't say that, well, I always have a deflation after Ramadan. Did you choose to have the deflation? No. Are you in control? No. So what do you ask yourself? Given my circumstances, with my knowledge of how I am, what should I be doing? What are routines I should have? What are practices that I should try to sustain? And to be realistic about what you can be consistent upon, given your circumstances. So you set a plan. Now, you don't think that you're in control of good outcomes or bad outcomes. You don't say, I'm going to succeed in this because this time, no. You go with ubudiyya to Allah. I'm going to do my best. And this appears the right thing to do when you consult where unclear. I'm going to do my best to do what's most pleasing to Allah. And then you rely upon Allah. You don't say, I'm going to do it, and you don't say, I'm going to fail. And then you're willing to adjust. Right? If you find that you could do better, maybe you should consult. You may want to do more or better. If you think you're a bit too ambitious, you may want to scale down. Right? So that you can sustain it. Right? And in that, if you are seeking Allah in a way that you've done your best to try to determine that this will be likely to be pleasing to Allah, and then you exert sincere, consistent effort therein, then even if you fail every time, you are successful. You want to get up for tahajjud each night. And you can do it. You have a very flexible work schedule, etc. Night 1 you fail, night 2 you fail, night 3 What are you rewarded in accordance with? Your intention. But you should remain committed to do what's pleasing to Allah. But if you keep failing, what should you do? Maybe consult. Maybe it was too ambitious to get up half an hour before. That's why consulting is mercy. And it's central to our deen. Shura, which is both broad consultation and then the particular consultation of seeking informed counsel. You ask and say, you know what? Don't try to do half an hour. Just get up 10 minutes before Fajr, do 2 rak'ahs. Make that a habit and then increase gradually. If you're finding it very difficult to do it all week or you get tired at work, begin with the weekend. Do Friday night, Saturday night. Once you make that consistent, add 1 more night. And then go like that gradually. And if you do that, actions are by the intentions. If you intend that, well, right now what I can sustain is Friday and Saturday, but I want to do every day, Allah rewards you and gives you the spiritual benefit of doing every day. Because we are dealing with the most generous. Right? And He is merciful, not just to you, but He's merciful with you. Right? And He's telling you to have mercy upon yourself. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us of those who embrace the manifestations of mercy. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا يا رب العالمين. اللهم تقبل منا واقبلنا واجعلنا من عبادك المقربين المحبوبين العارفين الذاكرين الشاكرين الصابرين المتوكلين عليك يا رب العالمين. اللهم احي فينا وبنا سنة نبيك المصطفى صلى الله عليه وسلم يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعلنا من خواص عبادك المتبعين المحبين لرسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم إنا نسألك حبك وحب من يحبك وحب عمل يبلغنا حبك يا رب العالمين. وارحم أمة سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم كافة عامة يا رب العالمين. اللهم ادفع عنهم ما نزل بهم من الشدائد والظلم والقحط والجور يا رب العالمين. واجعلنا ممن يسعى في الخير ويؤيد المظلوم وينصر الضعيف يا أكرم الأكرمين. We ask you that you grant ease, assistance and facilitation to the entire ummah of your beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you grant them relief in all that has descended upon them of oppression and wrong and difficulty and distress and poverty and hardship ya Rabbil Alameen, and make us of those who exert ourselves in our work and in our life and in our concern and our prayer, in our striving and in our giving, to be of those who grant relief, assistance, facilitation of those who truly care, and to make us of those who realize in faith and realize in the realities of the condition made by your beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه من الخير ما يحب لنفسه, that none of you believes until they love for others of the good that they love for themselves. We ask you that you grant us deep prophetic concern so that we seek the worldly good and the eternal good for all your creation and facilitate it for them, and strive to exert our utmost to the best of our abilities and the best of ways in doing so. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.